If you've ever been triggered by someone or something at any point in your life, then you know what it's like to have your emotions come up almost like an erupting volcano to the point that you wind up saying, doing, and feeling things that you don't expect to say, think, and feel. And then after you come out of that triggered state, you're left with regret and feeling again out of control of your life because once again, your emotions took over. If that resonates with you, then you're gonna wanna watch this video. For those that don't know me, my name is Michelle. I'm a trauma-informed coach, a somatic experiencing practitioner, and I'm also the founder of the School of Transformation, which is a monthly membership. I consider it like nervous system rehab, where we work on our nervous system together and we learn how to come back home into our body and we do the inner healing work together. So I'll leave the link here if you want to check it out. So the first thing I want to mention is that as we're learning to control our emotions, which by the way, I want to change that phrase. Rather than controlling our emotions, what we really want to do is to be in a relationship with our emotions, right? So as we're learning how to have a relationship with our emotions, the first thing we have to realize is that there's no good emotion and bad emotion. I think sometimes when people are healing from CPTSD, they think that there are certain emotions they're going to feel, like joy, peace, happiness, excitement, passion, right? Those are emotions that often trauma stifles. So they're excited to feel them, and they think that feeling things like anger, frustration, irritation, disappointment, sadness, guilt, sometimes people think that that's a step back. But the reality is that healing isn't about being in just one kind of emotions as opposed to the other. No, healing is about having the capacity in your body to be with all emotions and to still feel grounded in yourself. Just wanted to throw that out there before we even dive in. Again, we all experience strong emotions, whether it's anger, anxiety, sadness, frustration. It's not necessarily the emotion that's the problem or that makes us feel like we're out of control, but rather the intensity and the length of time that we wind up staying in that emotion. The good news is that you can learn how to have a better relationship with your emotions so that you don't feel like they're controlling you. So I want to give you a few really powerful tips that can help you to start feeling as if you're living life less from a reactive state, an emotionally triggered state, and more from a grounded state. But always remember that when we're stuck in a triggered state or we've been triggered for a long time, the recovery isn't overnight. It's not enough to just watch a video and then suddenly the triggers are gone and your reactions are gone. Just like if you're wanting to get in shape physically, you can watch a video, but your body isn't going to embody the change until you are consistently exercising. And so it's the same thing with our nervous system. We need to exercise it regularly in order to see the benefits. And that's exactly why I created the School of Transformation, because so many people were saying, Michelle, I get the knowledge up here. I understand everything, but it's the embodying part that's difficult. So again, if that resonates with you, make sure you check out our live meetings. Let's dive into those points. But before we do, let's talk about the why controlling our emotions is so important. Emotions obviously are a natural part of being human, but when they take over, when we operate from a reactive state, they can really have a negative impact on our relationships, on our decision making, and our overall well-being. Learning how to manage our emotions helps us to stay calm under pressure. It makes us better communicators, and then we're able to make decisions that we can stand behind. And it's not about suppressing our feelings. It's about responding to them in a healthy way. Tip number 1 is hard, but it is so important. And it's about pausing before reacting. If somebody pokes their finger in my eye, I'm not gonna think, I'm not gonna pause, I'm going to react. And that's appropriate because it's creating a lot of pain. And so it's a normal reaction. But here's the thing about our emotions. Oftentimes when we come from that triggered place that feels out of control, it's because somebody, whether intentionally or accidentally, is poking their finger in a painful belief. But oftentimes that belief is no longer true in our life. I'll explain more about that in a few moments. But the point is that rather than letting that emotional reaction come out, right? We can't stop it from coming up inside of us. We can't. Our autonomic nervous system is kicking on. If we can learn to notice it in our body and take a pause by utilizing our breath, or it might be about counting to 5 in your mind or even taking a pause from the conversation. We can give ourselves some space from reacting in a way that we might regret later on. And so that pause helps your brain to shift from an emotional reaction into a thoughtful response. So it's a powerful way to regain control over your emotions instead of letting them take over, get in the driver's seat of your life, and dictate your actions. Tip number 2 is about naming the emotion. In fact, we call it name it to tame it. Now, why would we have to do this? Well, for the majority of us that struggle with controlling our emotions, the reason is because I know with myself, when I was young, I was not allowed to have emotions, or I was only expected to have the emotions that I was told I was supposed to feel. And so I had no relationship with my emotions, right? And so what's the first thing we usually learn about someone in order to have a relationship with them is their name. And so in this case, learning to identify what is happening in our body, the sensations that we're feeling, is very helpful in grounding us. And so when an emotion is coming up and is very strong and we're feeling overwhelmed, rather than having that come up inside of us and then we fling it onto someone else or we react from that place, we start getting to know ourselves better. We start understanding, like, am I feeling sad? Am I feeling anxious? When I'm feeling this way, where do I notice that in my body? What is the sensation of this emotion? By naming it to tame it, you create distance between yourself and the feeling. You become the witness of it instead of reacting from it, making it a lot easier to understand and manage. Tip number 3 is about practicing mindfulness. And this tip is really important because what I've noticed, even when I was in the beginning of my own healing, I worked on things when I noticed them. In other words, when I wasn't triggered, I wasn't doing anything to help myself for when I would be triggered in the future. I would handle it when I was triggered, which is the hardest time to handle anything. Because when we're in a triggered state, our midbrain has the ability to turn off our prefrontal cortex. And so our thinking mind is almost like offline. So mindfulness, practicing mindfulness helps us to have a relationship with our emotions, not only when we're at that triggered state. And so mindfulness is all about being present in the moment and learning how to observe your thoughts and your feelings without judgment throughout the day. So when we're practicing mindfulness and we have that space to notice an emotion and to be with it before we react, to notice it without judgment, we often wind up hearing the thoughts that are driving the emotion and hearing the beliefs that are driving the thoughts that are driving the emotion as well. And I'm not gonna lie, this takes time. To be with a sensation or an emotion that you were not allowed to have, a sensation that you have been repressing for a long time, takes building the capacity in your body to be able to be with it. So if you try this and you're like, okay, that sounds so easy and I'm going to do it, and then it doesn't work, again, it's because we have to build the capacity to be with strong emotion in our body. And so with mindfulness, one way that we start building our capacity is to start noticing, witnessing without judgment our emotions when we're not triggered. Noticing when we're happy, noticing when we're sad, noticing when we're disappointed, noticing when we're scared, noticing when we're overwhelmed. I challenge you to see how many different emotions you can notice throughout the day. So again, mindfulness helps you to step back from the emotion and to see it for what it really is, which is a temporary feeling that does not have to control you. And so tip number 4 has to do with challenging the thoughts or beliefs. Remember before when I said that when somebody puts their finger in your eye, it's normal to react, but that when they're putting their finger in a belief, it might be a belief that isn't even true anymore. Here's where I'm going to explain that. So let's say that you were raised in an environment where, sadly, for whatever reason, intentional, not intentional, but for whatever reason, you grew up feeling as if you didn't matter or as if you were unlovable by your caregivers, right? And so now you're an adult. And let's say you're in a relationship with somebody that is not healthy, and they use manipulative or psychologically damaging behaviors like gaslighting or the silent treatment. I know with myself, I'm kind of talking hypothetically, but technically this applies to me as well. And so I know with myself, in a relationship like that, when a person was giving me the silent treatment, it made me feel as if I was the walking dead. It was painful. It was so painful. It was like somebody was breaking my bone and they weren't even touching me. And so for a long time, I couldn't control my trauma response when somebody was giving me this behavior. Because for a long time, I didn't realize what someone was poking their finger in. It wasn't until I peeled it back and I was like, well, what am I making this mean about me? Well, they're being silent. That means they don't like me. And, right? That's a normal thing. Some people will like you, some people won't. And so with myself, I had to go another layer down. And I was like, okay, well, if people don't like me, what does that mean? And it came up, that means I'm unlovable. And when I realized that my mind was making that connection, I was like, no, it doesn't. That does not mean that. But the reality is that somewhere in my life when I was very young, I made that connection. If someone's treating me this way, that means I'm unlovable. But when I could see it and I could now uncover the meaning that I was making it, I could ask myself, like, do I agree with that? And the answer was no. And then I had to ask myself, well, what other meaning could it be? Well, the meaning is, well, that person's being really unkind and really unloving. When I changed the meaning that had formerly been outside of my conscious awareness, I could then change my behavior when somebody was acting like that. And so that challenging situation no longer had the ability to provoke a trauma response. So challenging the belief and the thoughts that come up when somebody's doing something is so important. The reality is that our emotions are triggered by the stories we tell ourselves. And oftentimes, if we're getting hysterical or having a strong reaction, the roots are often historical or because of the old stories from the past. But when we challenge the thoughts by asking ourselves things like, is this really true? Or what evidence do I have for this belief? Or when we uncover the meaning by asking ourselves, what am I making this mean about me? We can often let go of stories that no longer serve us and that aren't even true. And by being able to change the meaning and the thoughts, not only are we able to shift our perspective and reduce the emotional intensity that's coming up, but we can often uproot the trigger itself simply by changing the meaning. The last tip I want to share with you has to do with having healthy outlets. Emotions are energy in motion. And if we grew up in an environment where we had to repress all of the energy of our emotions, and we're almost in like a freeze state and there's so much activation beneath freeze, one of the best outlets that we can do is moving our body. So some healthy ways that we can release our emotions are engaging in physical activity, things like taking a walk in nature, exercising, dancing. Things like this allow us to burn off stress and anger. Remember I said earlier, there's an energy to our emotions. Each emotion has like a chemical signature that comes up in the body. And if we have intense emotion coming up into our body, it needs someplace to go. And so engaging in healthy physical activities allows us to disperse a lot of that stuck energy. So the goal is to let our emotions out in a constructive way rather than letting them fester, build up, so that we explode. So those are 5 tips that can be helpful in learning to have a better relationship with your emotions. I would love to hear which ones you try. Let me know in the comment section below. And remember, if you struggle with embodying what you're learning, come join me every week on Zoom in the School of Transformation, because that's what we learn to do, embody all of the knowledge that we're taking in when it comes to trauma recovery.